I've been watching the presidential race. You know, I'm friendly with Donald for 30 years. We've known each other for 30 years.
You weren't always friendly.
Not always.
Okay.
When he perceived me to be a potential competitor the second time around, when I was first there, he wasn't there.
Atlantic City we're talking about.
Yes. And then when it looked like I was coming back and we were going to build the marina project, he wanted to oppose that development, and it got pretty testy for a while. But it was business, you know, and you don't take that stuff too personally. So it was easy to make up. And you know, I've enjoyed company with him socially, with his very lovely wife, Melania, who's a terrific kid.
But you've come to his rallies too here. I remember, I think there was one over at Treasure Island.
I went to the victory rally.
Right.
At Phil Ruffin's invitation,
right,
the night of the Las Vegas caucus, the Nevada caucus, and he gave me a shout out. You know, Donald Trump is the kind of guy who has a lot of friends in New York and out in the West Coast, including Phil Ruffin and I here in Las Vegas. And he calls us and we talk about what's going on. He was self-funding and didn't want any money. And like most people, I've been watching the presidential race because so much is at stake in it, hoping that the conversation would get productive. And it's just started to get productive now, finally, as we head into these last 2 months.
In what way do you think it's gotten productive?
The issues are getting more substantive. Instead of the personal attacks, the negative ads continue unabated, but we've got Donald Trump talking about specific things and economically clarifying positions. I'm waiting for Mrs. Clinton to do it, but I definitely want us to want the country to have a Republican Senate and a Republican House. The thing, John, the thing that eclipses the campaign is what is really going on in the USA. We know that we have a very restless, frustrated, anxious electorate. And everything that's been written and stuff you've written is reflective of the angst among the folks, to use O'Reilly's term. Now, why? Okay, national security, personal safety has become an issue in the last year as the jihadi threat has come home. But really, there's something much more profoundly going on. And it is the root cause of the entire issue of polarization in America. And whether that polarization goes between Democrats and Republicans, blacks and whites, Hispanics, and it all boils down to one thing. The living standard of Americans is being eroded.
You're leaning against Secretary Clinton. You're going to support Donald Trump, are you not, at some point?
Probably, but I haven't done it yet.
You haven't given him any money, just advice and counsel?
That's all.
Really?
Yes.
You haven't contributed any money in the presidential race to any of the PACs or anything like that yet?
No.
So okay, all my searching through the internet was not in vain. I thought I couldn't find any. There really isn't any. I mean, you know Trump pretty well. You know the criticisms of Trump. You didn't meet. You told me you didn't even meet Hillary Clinton until last year when you had a dinner at your apartment with Bill Clinton, who you know very well. You know Trump. I know you're surprised by his rise. You and I have had these conversations before. Do you think that the big criticism of Donald Trump is that he's just not ready? He's not stable enough. He doesn't know policy enough. You know the guy really well. Is he ready to be president?
Oh, he's stable enough. Donald is a intelligent guy. There seems to be a thing about him getting in front of a crowd, and in which he gets aggressive. And sometimes his speech is, you know, he shoots from the hip. Privately, he's thoughtful. And that's the reason he's been successful. And he is successful. I mean, you know, I remember Ivanka was staying at the hotel while they were building the Trump building that he and Phil Ruffin did across the street from the Wynn. And Ivanka was staying in the hotel all the time. And several of my employees made a point of telling me, because they knew I knew Donald, what an incredibly elegant and polite and graceful gal this woman was. Well, you know, I've got daughters, he's got daughters. I called him up and said, you ought to be proud of your daughter. Boy, has she made a great impression around the hotel. And I said, half a dozen of my people, or maybe more, have told me how lovely she is and how grateful and polite. She's quite something. 4 days later, I get a letter from Ivanka saying, oh, Mr. Wynn, apparently you must have called my dad, but he came to my office and made a fuss over me. It was quite wonderful. You didn't have to do that. Thank you. Well, in a subsequent conversation, I asked Jeanine Pirro, who's on television as Judge Jeanine on Fox.
Right.
Her husband was Trump's lawyer for years, and she traveled with the Trumps while the children are young, growing up. And she told me that the disciplinarian and the real influence on the children's lives was Donald, week in and week out as they were growing up. And if you take a look at those kids, that really tells you something about the man.
So you're saying he's much different in private. You're saying he's a performer at those rallies. Don't you think he said some things?
I think he's a performer at the rallies, and I think he hasn't quite, you know, got his act down. But in a personal conversation about any substantive issue, Donald Trump is focused and intelligent. This business of being a politician and getting into the razzmatazz of public debates and public speeches, I think it's a heady business. And, you know, he's been a real estate guy. It's all about his one-on-one contacts with people and his vision of understanding the future. And on that point, he's a much stronger guy than he appears to be when during the primary season especially, he was rambunctious.
Why haven't you supported him then? Because you know this other side of him. You think that this criticism of him is unfair then, probably.
I don't think of this whole business of the election in terms of personalities. I'm thinking in terms of the election of what is doing damage to my employees. Look, every benefit that I've received in life, and the only reason you asked me to come over here is because of the success my businesses have had. And that is due to the employees, the 12,000 or 13,000 people that work for me in Las Vegas and the 30-odd thousand that work for me at the Mirage resorts. I am very much aware of the condition of my employees, because I know that when they're in a great frame of mind, when they feel safe, secure, and happy, then they pass all that joyfulness and that positive energy on to my guests. And that's the reason the place has a franchise. So I'm HR sensitive, and I know what's going on with my employees, and I know what's going on in America. And unless the living standard of Americans is improved, this kind of frustration and anxiety that's erupting in many ways in this country is going to get worse.
But I don't understand, that still doesn't explain why you haven't supported Trump yet. You obviously like him better.
I'm looking for a discussion in the public forum that's focused on the issue of the day, that we can't owe 21 or 22 or 23 trillion, which is where we're headed. We can't really increase the money supply by 50 billion a month and have people stay calm. They're going to get steamed, and they're going to bitch in 100 different ways. And if it's the lower end of the economic spectrum, which unfortunately is the African American community, they're going to be more anxious and more disruptive than they were before in their frustration. And people are going to begin to look for excuses like, we got to be against the immigration is out of control. Well, the fact that immigration's been out of control for a while is no surprise to anybody. But the reaction to immigration is, again, part of the problem of the economic dislocation of people's lives.
But Trump's tapped into that, that's for sure, and he did during the problem. But don't you think he's done it in language, Mr. Wynn, that should disturb some people?
Look, if things are awry, if things are screwed up, and someone comes along that says so, I don't think it's really very important on how good his rhetoric is. If he's a rough-talking businessman, so what? The question is, what's he going to do about it? what's he really saying? The language he uses, you know, some of my friends tend to use more profanity than others. Some of my friends are more bombastic than others. But what do they stand for substantively?